Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming here. My name is Noelle Nelson, and I am the Collections Specialist at the Columbia Museum of Art. And I'm very happy to be doing this program with my colleague, Joelle Cook, the museum's Deputy Director and Director of External Relations. So Joelle and I began our career long ago in association with the museum when it was still at the Taylor House. She in 1993 as a docent, and I in 1994 as an intern under the direction of one of our speakers here tonight, Kevin Tucker. And she was a year ahead of me in graduate school, and we had similar classes. We shared classes together with professors such as Randy Mack, Brad Collins, and Beverly Heisner, if any of you recognize those names. But we have experienced all the renovations together. All of them. But to tell you about the first one and the latest one are these fine folks here. So Bill Bodine was Chief Curator of the Columbia Museum of Art from 1994 to 2002. And Bill specializes in Italian Renaissance and Baroque art and is currently a member of both the museum's Board of Trustees and the Collections Committee. Kevin Tucker is Chief Curator at the High Museum of Art in Atlanta, specializing in late 19th and early 20th century decorative arts and design. Kevin was Associate Curator of Decorative Arts during the museum's move to Main Street. Bill and Kevin worked closely with architects to design the gallery spaces and oversee the original 1998 installation. Michael Neumeister is the Senior Curator for the museum. He arrived in February of 2022 and specializes in 20th century American art. Prior to coming to the CMA, Michael worked at the American Federation of Arts in New York City. And Sadé Ayorinde is the curator at the museum, and before arriving in August of 2024, she worked at the American Folk Art Museum in New York City, and she specializes in modern and contemporary African American art. Michael and Sadé oversaw the installation of the new renovations that just finished up a few weeks ago. So I'm sure that most of you are familiar with the saying, insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. Now, while I can say that being involved in so many installations here at this place, I have experienced intense moments of insanity, and I have witnessed some moments of insanity. I do not think we are doing the same thing over and over again, because while it might seem to some that it seems like it's the same thing over and over again, and why bother? Every installation is different. Each one has its own spirit. It's true, we are in the same building, we're in the same galleries, we're even using several of the same pieces, like pieces from the Crest collection, or pieces that are very precious to us because they were given to us by certain donors. And pieces that are important to the education department because they're used for certain tours or interpretations. But the curators for each of the major renovations have been different. And sometimes so have the registrars and the preparators. Over the course of the various renovations, there have been 8 curators, 5 registrars, 3 curatorial assistants, and 6 preparators. Some here for more than one renovation, and some for all, and others only experiencing the madness a single time. Each time, though, the wall colors, the labels, and the themes for the galleries are completely transformed. There have been various loans to enrich the layout, and now the lighting system has been upgraded, enhancing what we can do and how we see the art. And I have been lucky enough to work with all of these curatorial staff members. And so now, the 2 teams of curators are here to discuss these projects. Enjoy.
Thank you, Noelle. So really what I love is that we have an intimate group here tonight. I think you are mostly familiar faces to many of us. So let's just have a really kind of fun and light conversation around the work that we do here at the museum to use, to redo galleries in different eras, to tell different stories, or to celebrate stories that are universal and last for a long time. It's funny to be in that place where hindsight allows you to reflect as Noelle and I have been able to do, Bill now being part of our family again, you're able to kind of look back. Because when you're in it, and you all know this from the work that you do, the committees you serve on, sometimes you can't see it all, but when you have some distance, it's really a wonderful experience. And I think it's really special to have this conversation right now while we are kind of almost like crowning our 75th anniversary year. So the museum opened in 1950 on March 4th. So we are kind of coming into the home stretch of 1 year of celebrations of the 75th. And what I love is that we can come full circle in this building, in the Main Street building, but that Bill and Kevin were part of the team that worked for a good while in the Taylor Street house and then designed a program and had a vision to see what could be different landing here on Main Street. So with that, and then we'll come full circle to what literally opened just 3 to 4 weeks ago, next door. And we found some conversation through lines that I want to share with y'all, that we had a great time on Zoom. So we may just roll hard and have lots of talk, and we will definitely get questions at the end too. So we want to hear from you on what you want to know, because I kind of look at this as a lift the veil. How do curatorial choices get made? How do you create these incredible galleries? How do we get there? So with that, I'm going to start out with how did we land on Main Street from the Taylor Street Museum, which was an old house. And it was beautiful, but it wasn't the easiest museum to work in if you're Kevin and Bill and Noelle. So how do we do that? So Bill, I'm going to start with you. Why don't you tell us why we needed this Main Street facility?
Is this working? Yes. Starting off, let me just say that if Sal Salala and the Board of Trustees weren't planning on moving, I would not have come to work here. The Taylor House, Kevin had a much bigger office than I did. We were upstairs in the Taylor House. We were upstairs in the Taylor House. Cindy Connor was the registrar. Mary Grace was, what was she?
She was your curatorial assistant.
She was a curatorial assistant. Noelle came shortly after. I came in 1994, so did Noelle. But we knew from the beginning that we were moving. And I spent 4 years going through, our painting storage was just sad. It was, we did have some sliding racks upstairs in the Taylor House, but I had no idea what we had. The CMA Collection was installed in a gallery space that was built in 1960. It never moved. Nothing moved. Everything was a permanent installation. There was a small temporary exhibition gallery, and we did our best. I remember there's a wonderful picture of me somewhere sitting in the corner during a Beverly Buchanan installation on the floor, kind of. I think maybe that's where the mallet came in. Kevin brought me a gift tonight. We had a joke. We were trying to get something into a crate at some point, and it would not fit. And I turned to everybody and said, "Somebody go get a mallet," which is something we don't like the public to know that we do. And we didn't really do it. But
And this is being recorded. And we're going through accreditation.
So it is being recorded, but we'll just delete that part. So it became a kind of a mantra for the staff. You know, when we're having difficulties, when things are not working, we would just say, "Where's the mallet?" And it just became, a touchstone for us. But Kevin and I spent 4 years, working with the registrars, planning what was going to be in the new building. As part of the process of building the building, we hired gallery designers, museum designers from Washington, D.C., George Sexton and Associates. So we knew what the galleries were going to look like. Everything was labeled. When we finally moved over here in March of 1998, things that were going in the galleries went directly to the spot that they were going to go to. So everything was very well planned. We maintained a program at the Taylor Mansion throughout. I think we closed to the public in March, didn't we?
Yeah, I think we weren't closed that long.
No.
So, because I was working in the education department, so we were still trying to receive people. So pieces that were on the wall in the quote contemporary type galleries were there for a little bit so we could still serve the audience.
Right.
But then at a certain point, it was just had to be done.
I think there was only about a 3-month period where Columbia did not have an art museum, which was really quite remarkable.
So Kevin, to play off of that, one of my favorite things that I got to do was to have a phone call with all these guys and talk to them. And Kevin and I were talking about it, and Kevin painted a picture around collection discovery. Bill started it here too, but Kevin painted a picture for me around collection discovery. So as you became a staff member here, there were nooks and crannies, and you mentioned flashlights and crawling over boxes. So talk to me about discovering the collection.
Well, I had the joy of the Columbia Museum of Art at the Taylor Mansion being my first full-time museum job. And I was not hired as a curator, I was hired actually as an assistant registrar. And in large part, at that particular moment, when Nelson Mason, who was the chief curator of the museum, it was to get a handle on what was in storage, what was there, or what needed to be cataloged. And there were things in the basement, in storerooms, that you can imagine a turn-of-the-century mansion with sort of this labyrinth underneath, with various storerooms with bronzes and glass chickens and doll collections and toy soldiers and textiles of all variety. So it was just sort of boxes upon boxes and shelf upon shelf, things that had come into the museum and had been tagged to some degree, but not really thoroughly cataloged. What is this? What are these 187 glass 19th century pressed glass chickens? And trust me, I had to go through each and every one of them. So it was a process of discovery. And there's a reason the 187 glass chickens are not in the collection. I think there's 1 or 2 that may still be in storage here that were kept as sort of keywords. There you go. And again, that's a curator's job, and that's actually what I ended up doing, even though I was a registrar for a number of years. I finally said, listen, you need to make some decisions about what is going to be retained and what is not going to be retained, what came in the very early years of the museum when the museum curators are just saying, whatever, we'll take it, sure. And I think this is nothing unusual relative to the Columbia Museum of Art. I think any museum of that scale, particularly in the 1950s, going through sort of a growth period, you're trying to figure out what are you doing and who are you? And as you move forward in time, as the curatorial profession becomes more professionalized and the museum becomes more discerning, they're very, very careful because we realize that these are legacies that people give to the museum and they want to see them utilized. So these things are not just, you don't get rid of them and do nothing with them. They were turned around. Some cases, works were sold and then new works were purchased that were appropriate for the museum's collection, but carrying forward those names. So there was a lot of sort of review of the collections that went on at this early moment, well before the new building project went on. And ultimately, I began work as assistant curator for decorative arts in the museum's history. So that point forward, and then working with Bill, we got very, very deliberate about what do we want to do in the new building that we can't do and just simply unable to do in the Taylor Mansion. And a big part of that was the, just sort of, again, the labyrinthian nature of that building of, are you going to the planetarium, or are you going left or right, is, you know, there is an attempt, oh, this is kind of modern and contemporary, and this is kind of Cress and Friends, but you never really had a real structure other than the structure that had existed for all the years that those things were on the wall. And we really wanted to be very deliberate about the didactic program, the educational program, and get people excited about these collections in new ways. And so what was new then, which is interesting in retrospect, was for us to be able to do what was pretty much a chronological installation. And the first installations here in 1998 were chronological, but it was also the first moments of really integrating decorative arts and design with the fine arts collection, thinking very strategically about the layering that we could do between different areas. How are we going to foreground the Crest collection? How are we going to foreground Southern art? How are we going to foreground whatever we may be developing and collecting, works on paper, things of this nature? So all of that was sort of strategically being considered as we were laying out plans for this building. And it was an opportunity we simply did not have due to the nature of the architecture of the Taylor House. That was its limitation. So it was an exciting moment for Columbia, for the museum, for the staff, and I think it was why we were also eager, and as Bill said, you know, the reason that he wanted to come here to Columbia to be part of that was to really launch that endeavor.
So Bill, you talk about very quickly the space very quickly the space in the Taylor House, but what your vision was for the gallery spaces here.
You mean the literal galleries or the stuff in the galleries?
No, the literal galleries,
Literal
because
galleries.
the space is part of this story of the move to Main Street.
You know, when we were building this building, when we were turning Macy's into the Columbia Museum of Art, I said, you know, how is this going to work? And the first time we walked through over here, I mean, Kevin and I really discovered that this building is built on a, 24 by 24 foot bay. If you go into the galleries, we saw the space stripped down to the concrete deck and steel columns. And there was a column every 24 feet. And he said, this actually works as an art museum. You end up with galleries that are either 24 by 24 or 24 by 48. The big gallery out there is a double gallery that's 24 by 48. All the other galleries are 24 by 24. And when we hired George and David Tozer, who worked for George, to come here and think about what these galleries were going to look like, my instinct was that I wanted it to look like the National Gallery of Art in Washington. And for those of you who have been to the National Gallery, you know that the portals, they're not really doorways, they're portals in there that move from one room to another. And in the National Gallery, they're all stonework, and they're beautiful travertine walls. Here, it's all woodwork, but really it's meant to kind of invoke traditional gallery spaces in an established institution. We were not interested in white cubes, just, as a standard gallery space with no kind of definition, no ornamentation. And what I'm really proud of after how many years now? 27 years. Those galleries look good. Every time I walk into them, I think, these are classic galleries. They hold up. They honor the works of art. And the works of art feel at home in those spaces.
So Michael and Sadé, you inherited spaces. So we actually added 3 white cubes
Well,
to Bill's original
And
plan.
appropriately, because that's where modern and contemporary art was going.
Exactly. So when we opened, we were putting modern and contemporary art downstairs. We actually got lucky enough with the organization to have big shows come in for temporary exhibitions. These guys got to work in a temporary exhibition space that was, what, 1/5 the size of the one that we have now. So we were able to bring in big shows, really big shows. So what started to happen is we didn't have modern and contemporary on view sometimes. So sometimes it looked like our collection stopped at like 1910. So in 2018, we did an expansion and we added gallery space that allowed us to keep modern and contemporary there and up all the time. Sadé and Michael inherited these spaces. So they didn't choose spaces or didn't get to choose design of bricks and mortar spaces. But as you all were thinking about your collection reinstall, how did the space impact the decisions that you were making, Michael?
Well, yeah, I should also say that the space, I think Sadé and our experience is more similar to most curators' experience, which is the space is sort of dictated already. And we got to deal with the art, but of course there is that close relationship between what is appropriate for the space and how does that dictate kind of what goes in it. And I think it's really important for museums to have, in collection galleries, to have moments that anchor the visitor. This is maybe a personal thing, but when I go to museums and repeat visits and things like that, if I go to the Met, I always want to go to the grand staircase and see the Tiepolo in the same space. And I was very happy that when they reinstalled the European galleries, the Tiepolo remained there, although much changed throughout. And so there were moments punctuated throughout the galleries, even in the newer galleries from 2018, that very much dictated what needed to be there. And I'm thinking about in Gallery 20, which is the probably second largest contiguous space. It's actually the gallery right behind this wall, where the baseboards disappear. The track lighting is not recessed into the ceiling, but it's actually exposed. The space is very much contemporary art space or 20th century art space. And so it's a space for big paintings. It's a space for big abstract paintings. So we knew that that's what we wanted to do there. We knew that the Botticelli had its own niche. And in that section of the museum, the baseboards rise and fall throughout the space, which is really interesting and kind of a subtle but really nice conceit that punctuates all the galleries. So we knew that Botticelli had to go where Botticelli was going to go, which dictated then the collecting area that we wanted to highlight, which was European art in that case. So yeah, I think the space is super important, and we're blessed with a lot of space up here. And in some ways, I think in 1998, you had more space than you could really fill in some respects. And in some ways, we're still museums are always growing into their spaces in different kinds of ways as the collection expands. There are kind of two reasons to do a reinstallation. One is pragmatic, which is maybe there's a construction project, maybe there's a new chief curator that's really ambitious and wants to tear everything down. But then there's the ideal would really be that the collection has changed so much that it justifies a holistic reimagining. And I think we were kind of blessed to have a little bit of both. The collections were reinstalled most recently in 2018. We lived with them for however many years that is, 8, 7, I don't know. And during that time, there were a lot of acquisitions in the realm of post-war and contemporary art that really transformed the way that we were thinking about the space, and we wanted to sort of add on to that and amplify it in the best way that we could.
So I think that's a really good segue into talking about the collections. So for Kevin and Bill, you all have probably what felt like infinite space available to you after you have been kind of stuck in a box, for sure, and have very little space to constantly play with. So talk to us about what you could enhance in the collection, and also about favorites. What are those things that are favorites? And are they curators' favorites? Are they visitor favorites? Are they both? So favorites, and then what you could do with collections here that you could not do before, but that you were dreaming of a little bit.
In some ways, we had more space than we could fill when we moved in here. It was a stretch at times about finding things that were, let's say, sufficient quality and sometimes of good enough condition to hang for the public. We did it, but we had fewer galleries to work with than the museum has now. I mean, what I think was great was that in the Taylor Mansion, it was mostly paintings and a small temporary exhibition gallery. What this building really did was give Kevin free range to bring decorative arts into an equal position within the collections of the institution, which we did not have at the Taylor House. You agree?
Yes, absolutely. Decorative arts, sculpture, anything requiring a case, a pedestal, all the things that, were expenses, were space issues in the old building. And again, this part of the sort of the strategy, I should back up a little bit. I'm not sure of the percentage of collection you have on view now, but one of the things I'm often asked as a curator is, well, what percentage of collection do you have on view? Do you have everything on view? And we go, no, of course not. A typical art museum in the US has anywhere between 2 and a high of 8%. I think at the high right now we're like 6.5 or close to 7% of our collection of 21,000 objects, something like that. So, and again, this is nothing extraordinary in the museum world, and I used to liken it to a library, even though I guess that's not fashionable these days to liken things to libraries, but you can't read all the books at once, and you take them out, and you have experiences with them, and then they go on shelves, and you interpret them in different ways, and you put them together in different ways in the future, and that's what we do with exhibitions, that's what we do with collection installations. And I think the story, the books that we wanted to tell then, certainly I did as a decorative arts curator, was that the museum is interested in this material. And then the next step is, okay, well, what kind of material? And this is really where it gets to the strength of patronage. It's not only the curator going, quote, I really like this. It shouldn't be about whether your curator likes, it should be more so about where is there an opportunity to build distinction in that collection? What can you get in terms of what collectors are supporting you, what types of work, et cetera. And that needs to be a very strategic thing, that it involves not just the curator going, this is what I want to do, but the director and the board and the collections committees and all these things to formulate these sorts of plans. And I think we had some very good discussions about where there were opportunities, where there is value for distinction in collection. And decorative arts in general, can say, for the most part, unless you're chasing after $3 million Philadelphia orange chairs, there's a lot of value in aspects of decorative arts that you can pursue. And when we took advantage of that, what my area of expertise included 19th and early 20th century, we ended up with some really wonderful artifacts that I come back in here, I see them in the galleries, oh my gosh, I wish we had one of those. And I think about that because they're still fantastic objects and they're things that are very hard to get. And so hopefully the community comes in and has an opportunity to appreciate that and value that. Oh, you have to see this. It's a favorite of mine. Hopefully it's their favorite. But it's not just about what the curator individually says, oh, I think this is my personal favorite. My favorite question to actually ask a curator when I'm interviewing them is, what's your least favorite purchase that you've ever made? Because it goes against their grain. I can tell you their favorite purchase that they made for museum's collection. But then you have to think about, well, why did you buy that? Well, it was important to the museum. It was important to the context of those galleries. It was important to the context of that community. And if you can give me those sorts of reasons, that shows me that you're working against your own personal biases, which I think is a wonderful thing that curators are able to do.
One thing that I believe is one of the notes about the current installation is how many new acquisitions through donation and through museum purchase we have in this installation. Sadé, you were involved with a couple of the acquisitions that are literally fresh off the truck for us. So can you talk to me about what it felt like to think about the stories you were trying to tell and fill the space and the gaps in the story with new acquisitions?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I think what makes me, I guess, a little bit unique on this stage is I think I had the least amount of time with the collection before there was a reinstallation, because the reinstallation was already underway when I got hired. So I was sort of trying to understand what it was that some of the ideas that Michael was thinking about. And I feel like when he told me that he wanted to think about sort of contemporary interruptions sort of throughout the space, I was skeptical, only because I've seen that done. I've seen it done in other institutions, and I wasn't always convinced about how successful that it was. And so I think when we really started talking about how to do that, we recognized that in a lot of instances we would have to purchase those works. And I think what really got me on board was when we started talking about the decision, not so much to show sort of like a one-to-one, like this artist is picking up the exact mantle that another artist, a historical artist, or sort of copying a work and sort of twisting it and making it their own, but that we're really trying to demonstrate the sort of importance of historical objects, historical styles to artists today, and the continued relevance of these historical objects. And I thought, oh, well, yeah, that is actually sort of juicy and interesting. And so I think, when we just take the two sculptures that are in Gallery 1, because both of those are brand new, we have, two sculptures, the Audrey Flack and the Shakib, that are doing that work exactly, that are showing the ways that contemporary artists are sort of continuing to study art history and think about how they might be able to incorporate some styles into what they're trying to investigate in the current moment. And so I think when Michael talked to me about both of those works, I was like, these are not only are they, I think, visually stunning, but I think they were really on the nose to try to sort of highlight the way that this collection, which has so many historical works that we were going to be putting on display and sort of marching people through, it's fresh because we know that contemporary artists are still interested in the same things. And when you take something like the Mario Joyce, which is another brand new work, he's doing something different because he's not actually trying, sort of borrowing from Hudson River School, but he's thinking about landscape in a way that sort of injects some of the things that we're missing, some of the people, some of the issues. There's a critique sort of underlying that work that allows for him to be talking to historical artists and the work that they were doing, which I think is really important. I think that covers it, at least some of the highlights.
And I mean, some of this is just really exciting work. And so, Michael, you and I, and all of us have talked about that this installation in many ways is about the learning we've done as we've done collection installs in this building. And you were able to experience the thematic galleries and see the things that worked about it and the things that were kind of problematic about it, some of which are just literal logistics or deep catalog. And then you came up with a vision working with Sadé that's kind of a hybrid. So can you talk about that?
Yeah, Bill, you had made a comment on our Zoom that I thought was really poignant, which is that curators are kind of products of their times, and the profession moves in a certain direction. And the crass way of saying it was that maybe there's an element of groupthink. But in fact, I think it is all part of a process of learning and rediscovery. So, yeah, there was a moment maybe 10 or 15 years ago where a lot of museums were contending with how do you get more stuff out from the vaults that don't fit so cleanly into this chronological art historical narrative. And so the solution was thematic galleries, which the CMA, we lived with that since 2018. In a lot of ways, it was really successful. It was a great way to offer those kinds of different points of entry into contemporary works, historical works, artists that had been missing from the art history books and conversations in the academy for so many years. But then, logistically, there were issues with that, of course, at the CMA, because when you move into a fully thematic idea, where every gallery almost functions as a kind of an exhibition, you're really thinking it's really difficult to thoughtfully incorporate things from your collection, and you find yourself saying, oh geez, I wish I just had this or that, or these 2 or 3 different objects, and I might need to rely on our works on paper, and then those things need to be swapped out on rotations, and now we need to rehang this whole wall, and so on and so forth. So I think a lot of the solutions that we landed upon are ones that I think a lot of museums have landed upon at this moment. The Met is one of them in the European galleries. Is this kind of hybrid model where we're able to contextualize and hinge our own strengths, our own core collecting areas, but still offer these thematic interpolations that allow us to tell broader stories. And that's exactly what we did. So as you move through the galleries, we have 4 collecting areas here, of course. European art and historical American art being kind of the foundation to the museum. Wonderful collection of Asian art, which really distinguishes us in the state. We're the only museum with a collection of Asian art here. And then modern and contemporary, of course. And so punctuating the spaces, having these moments, and the architecture plays into this too, because there's an openness, as Bill mentioned, the portals allow for a lot of maneuvering. It's kind of choose your own adventure. You can move through spaces in ways that, well, truly a chronological hang could never work, right?
Because we did that on purpose.
Right, yeah.
There was always a thought that we weren't telling people which way to go. That we were giving them options. And if you want to turn left, turn left.
And it makes sense, and it's very effective, and also logistically it's really helpful too, because sometimes if you have these huge contiguous spaces that we all love, like maybe at the Whitney, you need to have a lot of temporary walls, you need to do a lot of construction every time you want to rehang something. And so, having the idea of those pier walls downstairs was another great option for the CMA from a logistical perspective. But anyway, yeah, even when you try to hang something chronologically and quote unquote consistently, you're never truly accomplishing, you're never telling the full story. Every collection has gaps, right? Except for maybe a handful. So having those moments where, yes, there's 3 kind of contiguous European art galleries, and then you walk into American sculpture. And then there's a still life gallery, which is the sort of thematic play that comes into the strength of the collection, where we can have an object from each collecting area on view. A gallery dedicated to decorative arts, where we try to accomplish something similar. More American galleries, it's just sort of, you can kind of, again, maneuver through in the way that you want, in a way that's kind of unexpected. It offers kind of interesting moments, I think, from gallery to gallery, in terms of what the visitor is thinking and experiencing in an American art gallery, then suddenly walking into Asian art, moving forwards and backwards in time, and so on. So that was all kind of part of it. We really thought about the experience of the visitor. I'd like to think of this installation as a really visitor-centered, in terms of thinking about the movement and the ideas, and hopefully making connections across galleries as well.
You might just say that I think you touched upon the big point of all of this is what is the experience as the visitor takes away? What do they remember about that experience? And I'm in full agreement that you can never fill gaps in collections. Whenever someone says, oh, that's a gap we have. Every collection has gaps. How many numbers are there between 0 and 1? Infinite. But to your point, I want to know, what does that visitor, each and every visitor, walk away with in terms of their experience? What do they remember? What do they remember? I don't expect them to have Art History 101 all year by the time they walk through even a chronological install. But I do agree with Michael that this variety and sort of hybrid model is much more successful than trying to pretend that we're handing someone the full art historical canon when at the same time we're trying to blow up that canon.
I think that's a really good point. And so what we can do is play to strengths. And strengths over time in a collection can change too. So it really wasn't until we were in this building that Asian collecting Asian could be a strength for the museum. And Kevin and Bill, you were both there at the beginning of that opportunity.
Well, in 2000, one of the things about building this building was we knew that in order to build the collection, we needed people to feel like this museum was a worthy home for their objects. That was not true at the Taylor Mansion. Nice house that it was never a place that people walked into and they immediately thought, this would be a good place for my fill in the blank, because the security and the climate control and the storage facilities and the staff, and it's not there. Or at least it was not visible there. I mean, certainly the staff was capable, but the facility was not capable. And Jeffrey's here. Jeffrey, where are you? Over there. Jeffrey wrote a piece in the state newspaper in 2001. I have a copy of it here. Anybody'd like to see it? It was an interview basically with me and Kevin talking about what effect the building had had on donations to the collection. And it was really in 1999 when we moved into this building that I got the first call from a gentleman from Philadelphia who was born in Columbia, who had been to the museum and thought, well, this would be a worthy place for my stuff. And he had a lot of stuff. In 2001, the article that Jeffrey wrote, he had just given us a collage by Robert Motherwell, a box by Joseph Cornell, and what was the third one? It's here. They were major, and there's a wonderful quote that you got from Randy Mack, who was on our collections committee. Randy said, these are objects that any museum in the United States would be proud to have. The building gave us the ability to be a worthy home for important objects. And it has done its job over the past 28 years.
So that opportunity is one of those reasons why and then you get the opportunity to grow into the space. So the Turner story is a long story. Michael, you inherited, you and Sadé, kind of the legacy of Turner's gifts to this museum.
Yeah, and Chinese art is not our specialty. And so it was important for us to work with a curator, Susan Benningson, who's built collections over the years and was the curator of Asian art at the Brooklyn Museum, to really kind of sort through the objects and choose and curate a beautiful gallery here. The works are, in her words, they're remarkable. I mean, she was, piece after piece, she was totally blown away, and amazed by Turner's story as well. He was such an astute collector. He didn't really have an advisor. He was just buying things that he was really attracted to. It's not always the case that collectors accumulate objects of such importance and quality at the level that Turner did, kind of on his own. So it's a wonderful donor story, but it's also, again, it just distinguishes us, and it was important in this reinstallation. Previously, we had kind of incorporated the Asian objects in almost ancillary spaces, and part of that is due to scale. Many of them are smaller plates and things like that. But in this installation, it was really important to have a direct sight line into the Asian art gallery to give it its largest contiguous space that the museum has ever handed over to that collecting area, and to really highlight it, because it really does distinguish us. It is an important collection we're very fortunate to have.
One of the other things I like about the install y'all have done for 2026, Sadé, we have 3 artist-focused galleries up here with Richard Samuel Roberts, Winston Wingo, and Jasper Johns. And that's because of relationships or loans or depth of collection. Can you talk about those 3 galleries that are part of this kind of hybrid vision of the reinstall for 2026?
Yeah, starting with Jasper Johns, it seemed like a kind of obvious sell because of his relationship to the museum, his history in Colombia, and because I know a few of the works were actually gifted by the artist. And so I think for this sort of first gallery, we wanted to really highlight Jasper Johns as a one of the most sort of like famous American artists. We wanted to kind of be able to highlight him in the gallery. So I feel like that was a pretty easy, smooth decision. There wasn't a lot of conversation around that. But then with the Winston Wingo Gallery, that was, I think, a really fun project. We already had a Winston Wingo in the collection, so he was already someone that our visitors knew and had seen his work. But the heads, I think, are really special. We saw a whole collection of his work. We went up to Spartanburg. Michael and I went to go see an exhibition, and Michael already had known about his collection, and I was sort of blown away. And so it was, again, I think the heads are sort of so fantastic, and there's so many different versions that he's done, so many different colors, as you can see in the gallery. And so Michael thought it would be really great to sort of put a whole array on display. So I think that was really a great opportunity to build a further relationship with Winston, and really sort of build up an artist that maybe isn't even definitely maybe isn't nationally known, and really help showcase the kind of sort of excellent work that's being done in South Carolina. And then Richard Samuel Roberts, I know, has been on view before. The works that we have that are on view, we've shown before, but I think because we were opening this back up for the 75th anniversary, it made sense to highlight an artist that has that's so well known and that has this sort of rich legacy and storytelling that he's doing locally with the people who were here. And the connections that's brought between, I know, his family members that have, connections to the museum now. And so I think all of those spaces were really picked as really great starting points for us to be able to highlight different aspects of the collection, but then also sort of set ourselves on a pathway to highlight contemporary artists. So Gallery 11 will continue to highlight different contemporary artists, both South Carolinian contemporary artists and also contemporary artists from across the country, and maybe even outside of the country, depending on who we're able to find. So I think we're really setting the scene with those spaces as rotating galleries to continue to highlight really fantastic artists and their work.
That's great. So enjoy these for the next 6 months to a year. Kevin, I'm going to ask you the question around what I'm calling the curatorial crystal ball. So as you're buying art, buying historical art has certain kinds of risks, but working with contemporary artists and then looking at the crystal ball and thinking, what do you have to think about as a curator as you're bringing this into the collection and thinking about it being part of something forever?
on the contemporary side. Well, this is why I have the great joy of having a contemporary art curator at I, who's responsible for that, 2 of them, in fact. They do a wonderful job at looking into the crystal ball. But there, again, it's also what I was speaking to earlier, is about being very deliberate about your focus. And I think the same applies here, or Atlanta, or wherever, as really sort of looking at what you're targeting. What is your, at a very elemental level, what is your mission in terms of engaging with regional artists? What is your mission in terms of engaging with international artists? And I think that's one of the great points of distinction with the Columbia Museum of Art, is that it is not specifically a museum of South Carolina art, and there are opportunities to collect contemporary artists from anywhere and to draw various connections. So I think being deliberate about what you're doing, in the case of our museum in Atlanta, we have a very deliberate plan of what artists we're pursuing over the next 5 years. We know which ones we're going to be looking at as purchases. We're working with patrons on other ones. And it's not really like sort of checking a box, certainly of blue chip names. And that is the one thing I think as a curator that, and again, it's sort of the gap filling drives me crazy. The notion of gap filling is the same thing as checking names off. Well, we have one of those, great. Well, maybe it's not a great example of those, or why did you waste your resources pursuing that just so you can have that name there on the wall? Maybe you'd be better off borrowing that work from someone, or thinking about strategically how you're going to use your resources in a wiser, value-conscious way. So there are different ways to do that in contemporary art, and there are different areas to target. We have been, in Atlanta, making incredible inroads over the last decades in terms of diversifying our collection, and particularly representation of artists of color. And that is something that's been very, very deliberate in terms of where we are putting our purchasing power and where our patrons have gotten behind those purchases. And I always say that, whether someone gives us a work of art or we're spending money, well, we're spending money that someone gave us. That's all part of the gift. It's all part of patronage. So we want to make sure that we're using it in as wise a way as possible. And sure, every museum goes through sort of reconsideration. Was that a smart thing? Did I really purchase the right thing? And I was reminded of the luxury of the Museum of Modern Art and their design programs. Since my background as a design and decorative arts curator, is that they kind of did that like the glass chickens. They accept all of these design objects over the years, or they used to. They've stopped doing it now. They would accept thousands upon thousands of gifts from different manufacturers, and then they would deaccession like 90% of it within the first 5 years, just because they're like, no, it didn't stick. Essentially, they would bring a lot of things in. So it was very interesting to see what they were doing, but that's design objects. They're mass produced. It's a very different sort of ball of wax than all of the other types of collections. So we don't have that luxury. We do have to be very careful. We do have to think, where does this fit in our collection? Where does this fit in our galleries? Where does this fit in sort of the future legacy of the museum? Do we feel good about it? Do we feel strong about it? And there are many times where I'll go back to our contemporary curators and say, teach me, tell me why, convince me, show me more work, and try to get as much information about the context of the work, why this work is coming into the collection, and why those curators have that great conviction, because they have to convince me, they have to convince our director, they have to convince our board, they have to convince our collection committee, and they have to convince all of you. And so I think that applies to any museum.
So Michael, you've been in that space for the last 2 years. You go on a trip, you see Mario Joyce, you make a choice to tell a different story about landscape art, Hudson River plus contemporary work. That was a work that came to us fresh. It was even drying in the space. So talk to us about some of these very same choices that Ken.
Certainly still wet, yeah. Yeah, I think it's the hardest job. Honestly, it's the hardest part of being a curator, is looking into the crystal ball and figuring out, we buy or acquire objects for posterity. We need to think about the questions we ask ourselves fundamentally is, in 100 years, will this still be relevant? And it's not only about being relevant in some kind of an art historical canon or being relevant to just scholars. It's in terms of relevance to the community and to the institution. And every museum has really distinct collecting areas and focuses and missions. And I think for us, I mean, so much of our collecting, you know, we installed that salon wall in Gallery 2, and we were really thinking about what was the foundation of this collection and why. And if you look back in the first few decades of this institution, even when we were buying contemporary art, oftentimes it was realism, you know, it was figurative in nature. We're working very much in traditional modes of making. So portraiture, landscape, and still life, it just felt like a natural kind of a choice where we could kind of cut that off at the pass in some ways to sensitize the visitor to what it is that we have, where it all came from and why, and then as you move through the galleries, there are these moments of new acquisitions that can show up and kind of have this really intentional dialogue. In the case of the Mario Joyce, you know, he's obviously an artist that we're really excited about. He's a younger artist based in LA, and seeing that show in LA and the energy around it at that time, and just the quality of the work and the intentionality of it, the fact that he's incorporating soil from his own family, he's able to tell family stories and stories about history using different media. I mean, it just felt like a natural fit, but to be honest with you, I wasn't really sure where it was going to go. It's a huge painting. We actually had really a lot of conversations about where it should go, and God, if we put it here, what are we going to do with the wall color? Because this other painting here, you know, there was a, you know, but ultimately, obviously, it made perfect sense to be in conversation with historical landscape paintings. I mean, there was really no other choice. But yeah, all those kinds of questions, and there are times where we buy things and they don't immediately go on view. Because again, we're thinking about posterity, we're thinking about how we can contextualize it in the future. We just acquired a great Beverly Buchanan, and we had all these plans to have it out, and then one thing led to another, and it wasn't able to be out, but that doesn't mean that it won't be in some context soon. And interestingly, with Buchanan, of course, it's really important to the CMA's history because we showed our work in 1994 at the Taylor Mansion, which I can't even imagine how that looked. And the mallet may originate from that story. So again, it's looking back at you know, we acquired a Buchanan shack in the 1990s. It's kind of an amazing thing to think about, the CMA purchasing a Beverly Buchanan in the 1990s. The CMA purchasing, Bill, I think you bought the Allison Sarr in the 1990s.
Well, you know, I'm sitting here, you know, thinking about things I bought and why I bought them. I was basically, you know, in the fine arts restricted to works on paper. But I'm very proud of the fact that I bought the Allison Sarr, the Carrie Mae Weems, and the Willie Coles. I had a conscious effort to bring some diversity into this institution in the fine arts, because it was really a Eurocentric institution. And it needed to be, for so many reasons, not just where we are, but artistically, I mean, globally, we needed to be more than a Eurocentric institution. And we do the best with what we have. I mean, that's all any curator can do.
I feel like we're lucky too because of our ability to buy, which is a bit different than your ability to buy. Is the fact that when you listen to sort of a list of these pieces that we've purchased, almost all of the works we purchased have been by Black makers, and the works that we purchased are paintings, sculptures, which are actually able to be out for a really long time, which, you know, the works on paper holdings that we have are the most serious, you know, those are some of the biggest names and Black artists are works on paper, but the way that we were able to collect was to gather things that we could actually leave out, which I think was really, really important.
Yeah, it was really intentional, you know, and again, just being true to the history, you know, as the the organization. I mean, in the 1970s, we showed a Barclay Hendricks show, and I don't think we could afford to buy anything out of it, you know. But imagine back then the opportunity that those curators might have had. And now we're kind of in a different place, and so we're able to think bigger as we move forward. Jasper Johns, I heard you say.
Something about Jasper Jones.
Well, that's a good example.
This was Bill told me the story about interviewing Jack Kraft, the museum's first director, and specifically about the very early, of course, Jasper Johns was in Columbia. In fact, my office, another thing, my office, it was actually Jasper Johns' office when he was working for the Columbia Museum of Art, for the Veterans Gallery. There was a show at the Taylor Mansion of Johns' work. And so here you see, there's a wonderful photograph that Bill told me he had asked Jack Kraft about. And there are people there leaning over a piano with cigarettes in their mouth. And here are all these early Jasper Johns, all the way around the gallery. And I think Bill, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think he said something to him like, Jack, why didn't you buy? Well, why didn't you buy one of these Jasper Johns? You could have probably gotten it for $500. He said, I could have had two for $500. I didn't like them.
It's coming back to me. I think I had suppressed that. Jack was a bit obstreperous. And, but
That was really early.
That was really early.
64 or something?
That was really early.
And that was a broken crystal ball.
Right, well, imagine,
But that was at a stage, I mean, it's, you put yourself in Jack's position in 1964, and he's got this kid who is stationed at Fort Jackson who's making art. And is he going to foresee the future? Is he going to foresee the future for Jasper Johns? I doubt it. And would any of us have seen it?
by the time, okay, so I found a letter in the archive when Jack Kraft is writing to MoMA, because at that time MoMA had bought the Target. And Jack says something like, it was such a lovely show, I've hung the Target in my office, I'm just waiting for you to collect it and let me know when I can ship it back. So I was under the impression that Jack really liked his work and couldn't afford it. But
that may be true too. And Jack could have been covering up for his failure at that point.
there's a very interesting press clipping.
And there is a difference between Jasper in like 1952 when he's a guard and a preparator, and 1964 when he has the show here at the museum. But we were we before the Jewish Museum?
Yes, we were the first, Jasper's first museum monograph. Was at
Museum
the
show by Jasper Johnson was at this museum. Jasper, what did I just say?
Jones, you got it.
I think I said Johnson, but I meant Johnson.
We know what you mean. So I could ask 100 questions, but I want to give you all the opportunity to ask questions of these really wonderful curators, and especially around the through lines and around the evolution of this collection. It's a full circle story here on Main Street. So does anyone, let's see, who's gonna have a microphone here? You wanna grab mine? Yeah. Okay. So does anyone have a question? I know Jeffrey probably does. He's looking them up on his phone.
Oh, sure, since you already asked me. I've got one thing, not everybody here knows me or anything. I worked in a newspaper, I wrote about the arts for 20 years, or 19 years and 9 months. So I, saw the museum moving here and all of that sort of thing. But one of the things that's so cool about what Kevin and Bill are talking about is this is about a whole bunch more than moving the museum to a new building. This was really a complete reworking of the museum was not what it was going to be about, looking what was much different. But I just forgave it, putting all that in context. Before, the folks, Joelle, Michael, and Sadé, just kind of fun question is, and you were talking about the Joyce paying where you're gonna put it, but what were a couple of the other really big sticking points in doing this reinstall? Because this is like a puzzle where the pieces don't necessarily fit neatly together. So I wonder what the biggest challenges were in all of that.
Well, I mean, I think that, well, at 16, I guess we need to have different names for our gallery, so maybe be more. But it's the one that has the Salviati chandelier in the corner. That gallery, I think, is always, we spend that was like empty on the model for like a really long time. Like we were just like sort of staring at it, like what are we gonna do? But we had thought early on that we would actually take the Salviati down. And we had a loan that we were considering for that space that was also chandelier-like, and it was like a contemporary artist. It was really beautiful. And the Salviati actually could stand to have some sort of conservation done, and so that was part of the reason why we thought we would take it down and sort of. And we weren't able to actually take it down because of the way that it's screwed into the ceiling. And anyways, so I feel like after we recognized we weren't going to take that chandelier down, we just sort of left it there, like left that gallery there, and just sort of like pretended as though it wasn't there for a while, because it's really hard to between the chandelier and the stained glass, which is another sort of fixture that the stained glass has to go there. It's a bit of a question mark as to what do you put in this space? So I don't know. I feel like that's the one that sticks out in my mind as like one of the biggest hurdles.
I did that intentionally in '98.
So we can never move.
Thank you very much. But so I don't even know that we are necessarily. You know, I think we came up with it sort of builds off of the gallery that it feeds into, which is about art and architecture, and so we were able to kind of continue to play sort of on an interior architectural design in that space. But,
door knockers.
Yeah, exactly, with the door knockers, which are gorgeous, one of my favorite pieces that we have up. But you know, I don't know that we would necessarily say that that's like a space that we're totally satisfied with, but that's one that I think is still stumbling us a little bit.
It's wonderful.
Yeah, that's fine, but that doesn't mean you're 100% satisfied with it. It can be wonderful and still be something that you might want to do something different with.
Yeah. We had a few acquisitions in hand that we didn't quite pan out, and they're still kind of on the back burner, but that came to mind. But for me, I think it was actually the Monet, and how to highlight it and how to give it its proper place, but to put it in a new context. And it had for so long been in the octagonal gallery, where basically you could only put 4 paintings up. And the paintings that had surrounded it for so long had already surrounded it for so long. And so it was like, how can we do something new? And kind of going through the racks and thinking about it more closely. It's a difficult painting for us to contextualize in the collection because there's not much French Impressionism.
There's nothing else around it. And
Yeah.
you know, one of the problems is in a museum that the Columbia Museum of Art was about the Botticelli and the Monet. And no museum should be about the Botticelli and the Monet. And the Monet, I mean, the Botticelli is the Botticelli, and what are you going to do with it, right? It's kind of like the chandelier. What are you going to do with it? The Monet has the ability to move around, and it should move around. And it should be given more of a context in the future as funds become available. But no one work should define an institution. And this museum found itself in a position really of being defined by the Monet. I mean, that's all anybody ever said was, oh, have you seen the Monet? But, you know, or come to the art museum to see the Monet. or, you know, every time we did an advertisement, it was the Monet.
Which does not digitally translate.
It doesn't digitally translate well, it doesn't reproduce well, and frankly, one Monet is not going to drive an institution. So,
And there are other, you know, we don't have the Romneo, which is like a 12-foot painting. And we felt that we didn't need to, because the collection had grown in ways where there were plenty of other highlights. There's a few things that we don't have out, mostly crest objects, that we felt like, well, we don't have to do this anymore.
no, that's
Lovingly, we don't, you know.
lovingly.
That there's more.
But this, I mean, this gets very much to the balance of what you're trying to do is show activity and growth. And as much as we want people to return to galleries here and elsewhere and go, oh, it's my favorite, I'm coming back to see it because I want to see the Monet again, or I want to see the Botticelli again, that we do want the visitors to come through these galleries and go, wow, just as I go through the gallery, I've been back in these galleries in months since before the reinstallation, and it's wonderful to see the activity. I mean, that's it, something new. And hopefully that excites people too, even if they're not familiar with the particular works.
Other questions?
Hey, I have like one question. Gallery's back. You can see through Morty Stewart was genius because Monet's resolved so far back. And you don't have the gallery space in any other gallery to get far enough back to see it properly. So whoever came up with that was genius. Secondly, how quickly did you land on the Gilliam in the main gallery as far as like your centerpiece, and who came up with that? I'm curious.
I don't remember.
I don't, well, no, I think you, because we were taking the Warhols down because they needed to rest. And you were like, I mean, the Gilliams make sense. And because I had put them up over the summer, and they were on this dark color that they're on right now, and people seem to really like it and be kind of jazzed about it. It was like, that's like we knew we were putting them both up because they were both getting conserved, so it was kind of just like, we'll take this and we'll move this upstairs, and it made sense that they'd be the focal point since the Warhols, another sort of colorful piece, were going down.
That's right, we knew that the Warhols were coming down for a long time. I think it was an open question until we saw the Gilliams in person when they got back from conservation. We saw them on that wall color. I mean, they'd never been they had never been shown together. I was going to say in this building, but that's not true. Right, in at least 25 years. They hadn't looked that good. But they had never been shown face to face as they were in Let's Have a Talk last year. And now they're together and they fill the wall really well. Yeah, that was, I don't even know that there was an alternative actually.
No, there really wasn't.
So my question is, you've had this opportunity to sort of look at the collection holistically, and I think the galleries are gorgeous. Is there anything that you thought as you were going through the process that, oh, I wish we had, you know what's missing, or if we had this or that? Is there anything that, you know, is your heart's burning desire that you think would be a great addition? Yeah, I'm sure. But if you had to pick one or two.
I think we probably, well, one thing we definitely agree on is we wish we had we interpolated the Asian gallery, the rear of the Asian gallery where there's all those cases that are historical. We had really planned for like the whole time to have a contemporary artwork on that pier wall. And just for one reason or another, timing and resources, it just didn't quite pan out. But that is like the perfect place to have kind of that kind of interpolation. But I'm sure there's more.
Oh, every curator is trying to, if you asked me that question, Therese, I would say a great American portrait by John Singleton Conley. I mean, that's, if I had all the resources, I mean, and that's what I would add to the collection. What would you add?
Come back to me a little bit.
I thought about that for years. I thought about that for years.
No, the collection's very different now. I mean, that's sort of the joy of seeing the spaces and thinking about the direction that it's going in. And yeah, seeing these curators' visions and where the institution is at this point, because you know, what we did was 3 decades ago almost.
I don't know. I think if I'm thinking about the galleries, the way we have them set up, and I was trying to add something, I would want in 20, I would want like a Frankenthaler or a Rothko.
You were negotiating for a Frankenthaler.
The whole time, I continuously am like, let's just buy a Rothko.
I have the poster in my office.
That's close enough.
Oh.
It's close enough.
All right, do we have one more question?
I have a question for Joelle. How do you see the differences from using the collection that was in the Taylor House to the collections now as far as tours with docents? How is that grown due to the difference and the changes in the collection and also the building?
You know what, I'm gonna play off of what Bill said. In the Taylor House, it was about the Monet and the Botticelli. And we have very traditional tours. I wrote many of those tours along with our colleagues. Julie worked at the Taylor House. It was very traditional, learn some art history kinds of tours, because that's what 30 years ago was. So it was about the Botticelli and the Monet. Over the years here, what has changed is that people are drawn to new favorites. And I think we're starting to be the organization that's not about those 2 pieces anymore. Those 2 pieces are beloved, and they should be, but they are not the only thing. And so
They will always be on view.
And they will always be on view. So you know, part of that discussion is with the education department is what has to still be out here. The choices are so much more broad. And what I also love is just how museum education has changed. So I'm gonna nerd out for 2 seconds. We got a South Carolina Arts Commission grant as we were doing this project to be able to do a lot of research around what is next practice in museum education and school programs. And so our curator of education, Glenna Barlow, was able to do what I love, which is called the Magical Mystery Tours. Go to your favorite museums who are doing innovative things, spend time with their staff, witness what's going on, and then also spend a bunch of time with educators. And what is it they need now? And where they have landed is they want the kids engaged with social, emotional engagement and what the arts intrinsically can do. We're all art historians. We love the history of the works, but ultimately you want people to connect with them. And as they connect with them, the curiosity peaks. And you want them to then take that learning to any museum or historic home they go to. So that's the biggest evolution, is that it's now becoming where people are connecting with the piece. And so if our job is to put the object up and welcome the visitor in, the space we're facilitating in between is becoming richer and richer. So that's what I'm seeing. With that, I want to thank everybody for coming out. How many of y'all are museum members? All right, thank you, thank you. You helped make all of this happen, from collection reinstallations to programs. Thank you very much for being a member, and I hope you go back over and over again to this collection install, because you will always find something new every time you come. Thank you for being here tonight, and thank you everyone for jumping.